My name is Carrie Lane, and I'm going to be presenting today. Our session is going to be Unlocking Accessibility. I've been at the county office for 6 years now. I'm a project specialist with the Educational Technology team, and here today with me is Director of Ed Tech, Alicia Gallegos Butters. She'll be supporting in the chat if you have any questions or anything that you want to pause and chat about. She'll be facilitating that. And a little bit of background about me. I have a certification in assistive technology and am incredibly interested in the topic of accessibility. So I am so excited to be here leading this with you and to hear from all of you about what you're doing in your classrooms and how you are using accessibility to meet the needs of your students. I put here my contact email in case you want to contact with any questions. You have a link to today's slides. I put that in the chat and we'll put it in again a little bit later. And if you have any colleagues you think might be interested in the sessions as we move forward, please feel free to share the form with them so that they can register and be a part of this network. And I'll leave these up for just a few minutes. These are disclaimers. And whenever we're talking about accessibility, it's really important to remember that you all have unique students and unique rules and guidelines at your school. So it's very important to be in touch with your school administration as well as 504 and IEP specialists before actually implementing anything for students with specific disabilities. And that what we talk about today is not legal advice, and just we're here to explore and learn together. And so I want to leave that up for just a minute so you can see that. All right. So while I move into childhood disability data, if all of you want to go ahead and just share in the chat what school you are working for, what your position is, and then what students you're supporting. So are you supporting a specific grade level? Do you have specific learners? Just anything you think might be pertinent so that as we move through today's session, we can really hone in on your learners. Okay, high school students. Okay, PS through 6, 4, 5, PK. Great. And what's really nice about these sessions is that this one will be really the introduction to everything we'll be talking about. And then as we move forward with other sessions, we'll be moving into technology tools, how to use AI, tips and tricks, strategies. And so as we get used to our sessions together, we can really tailor and feel free to ask questions about your specific learners and their needs. All right, so let's start with just a basic definition of childhood disability. Childhood disability encompasses children with physical, mental, or emotional conditions that pose limitations to certain activities or tasks. And within our classrooms, we may have students who have childhood disability. We also might have learners that just have challenges or learning differences that mean that we can adjust our strategies within the classroom to meet their needs. And so we are going to touch on some things related to specific disabilities. They may work for specific disabilities, but also know that even if you do have students who aren't diagnosed with specific disabilities, a lot of these strategies are useful for your learners no matter what, and they may be really helpful for learners who just have specific challenges or struggles in the classroom. And in terms of disability data, it has increased from 3.9% in 2008 to 4.3% in 2019. And in 2019, 2.6 million United States households had at least one child under the age of 18 with a disability. And this is important for us as educators to know because while the 4-year graduation rate for most students without disabilities was 83.6, Students with disabilities, their graduation rate was 68.6. So there is a lot of opportunity for us as educators to really start tailoring and honing in on what we can do to help support students so that they can also make sure and be academically successful and have that same type of graduation rate as students without disabilities. And thank you everyone for sharing in the chat. All right, so I always like to begin these sessions with a little bit of just understanding our learners. And for those of you who are in our open house session, feel free to share in the chat about your experiences and some of the things that you might have gained from our open house that we had in December, where we explored in depth what it might be like to have different learning challenges. But for this session, we do have a video of students talking about what it was like to have different disabilities and learning challenges for them.
My name is Jade. I'm in the 8th grade, and reading is a huge struggle for me. Teacher would ask me to read in front of the class aloud. I'd open my mouth, but no words would come out. Not because I couldn't speak, because I couldn't read the words on the page. They were jumping around, backwards, blurry, sideways. D was a B, W was an M. I just kept it all to myself. Like, no one can relate to me. This is just my problem, and I have to deal with it. I have to find a way to deal with this. Oh my gosh. I can still remember the names. Idiot, dummy. Going through that takes a piece of you. After a while, you just you get this numb feeling, like it just doesn't bother you anymore. That's when you get really worried. That's when you should get really worried. When you get this numbing feeling, someone calls you something, you're like, I don't care. They're right. That's the worst feeling in the world.
I'm Alex, and I'm in the 6th grade, and math is not easy for me. When I look at a math problem, all I see is confusion, and it's like, what are numbers? A lot of times I get the signs mixed up. I don't know what they're called. My brain is going here to there, to there, to there, to there, to there, and it's just so crazy that I just want to scream. My stomach starts to hurt. I start to think the worst things about me. It's so overwhelming and stressful that it's hard to even think.
My name is Phoebe. I'm 11 years old and I have got cerebral palsy. I am disabled and I cannot walk or talk. I use a special computer to help me talk. I use that by looking at my screen.
Would you like to do at school?
I like maths.
What would you like to be when you're older?
I would like to be on television.
What's it like not to talk?
It is normal. You might meet me or someone else with a physical disability. Don't treat us like a baby or ignore us. Talk to me.
My name is Dylan, and I am autistic. All my life I wanted so badly to connect with people. But they couldn't understand, because I had no way to communicate. So many people can't understand that I have a mind. All they see is a person who is not in control. But now you can hear me.
Hi, Dylan.
Hello, my name is Dylan Bartwash. We are the reality of our thinking life, and are capable of so much if we just open our minds.
I like to show that video because I think it portrays what a lot of us see from our students and sometimes from ourselves, that there are things that we may struggle with, and everybody is experiencing different varieties of things in the classroom that they might be struggling with, but we can reach all of our different learners. And so I think it's important to show that video. And then I would love a volunteer. So if you are willing to volunteer, feel free to unmute yourself. I have a little activity that I would love a volunteer for.
I'll go. My name's Omar.
Hi, Omar. Thank you. Okay, so this activity is a simulation, and what I want you to do is, as the video plays, instead of saying the color that you see on the screen, or sorry, instead of saying the word you see on the screen, say the color of that word. And it'll you'll see how it goes. And as everybody else is listening, so you'll say that out loud, as everyone else is listening, just think about whether you would be able to do this. You might want to try it yourself as well, just to see the experience.
Yellow, green, red, purple, blue, yellow. I want to say pink, red, green, pink, blue, green, red, yellow, blue, pink, white, red, yellow, pink.
All right. So, Omar, how did that feel? Was that challenging for you? You did really well on it.
I've actually done that before a few times, and I still like, even after having done it a few times, not recently, it's just I still have to tell my brain, stop reading, stop reading, stop reading, because that's the first thing my brain goes to is read, and then I just started finally just looking at the center of the video and just saying, ignore the word. Like probably halfway through, I was like, ignore the word, literally just focus on one piece of the screen, no words bigger than the middle. So, and that's when I started doing a little better. But yeah, constant hesitation in there.
Thank you for sharing that. And so that's an interesting point that Omar made about coming up with strategies. And so the part that makes it so confusing is that our brain is used to doing something a certain way. It's used to reading the words from left to right. And in our directions as educators, we're making this task incredibly difficult for people. We're not allowing people to go with what they would normally be doing. And that's okay. We can make things challenging for people, though it is important to think about whether your directions are unnecessarily challenging. But in doing so, Omar was able to find a strategy that worked so that it was a doable task. And that's part of what this series is all about, is coming up with strategies and tips and tools that we can use to make this task that would otherwise be really daunting accessible to our learners. Does anyone else want to share their experience or their thoughts about either the simulation or the videos? And you can unmute or share in the chat, whichever works better for you. And if you have any students that this brought to mind for you that you want to share about, you can share that as well. Very slow. All right. Well, I do want to point you in the slide deck. There are links to more user stories and also more student videos of students talking about the different challenges they face, as well as strategies that you can use for different learning difficulties and different disabilities to support your students. So let's jump into web accessibility. And as I mentioned, today is the first of this network. And so we really just wanted to go into the general basics of what to think about as you're designing your content for accessibility, especially when it's related to digital content. So web accessibility is websites, tools, and technologies that are designed and developed so people with disabilities can perceive them, understand them, navigate with the content, interact with the content, and contribute to the web. And so that's an important part, because a lot of times we think about, can my learner understand something? Can they perceive what's going on? But we also want to make sure that they can move through the content and that they have the autonomy to contribute back to whatever we're assigning. See one more in the chat. Focus on the bottom of the first letter so you didn't read the word. Perfect, another strategy. And when we design for accessibility, it promotes greater independence for our students. When we make a task that our students are able to do, they're able to really excel and grow. We can make things that were previously impossible possible. And it's important to remember that small changes that you make for students with disabilities and learning challenges can help your whole class. As well, it's really important to have accessible content, because if you do not, you can get negative publicity and or lawsuits. I put in here a link to a number of resources about something called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These were created to guide people who are designing digital content, especially web designers. They're guidelines for making sure that your content is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And so if you click on this image here, it takes you to a list of lots of information about these standards if you want to learn more. But we today are just going to go through some of the most basic ones, and I'll try to explain to you why they're important and how to do them on different platforms. So before I get started, in the chat, would you please just type in whether you use Google or Microsoft for creating content most often? Google. Okay. So far, all Google. So I will likely skip the Microsoft ones and just know that you can come back to it and see how to do anything that I explain in Microsoft as well. All right, the first element is alternative text. And alternative text is when you are putting a textual description to an image. And would anybody like to unmute or to share in the chat? Why do you think it's important that there is a text-based description of a picture? All right. So the reason it's important to have a text-based description for your pictures is because, yes, so absolutely helping with possible misinterpretation is a really good point for why you might want to have that. Another reason is because students who have visual impairments and can't see the actual picture rely on a screen reader. And some of you may be familiar with screen readers that are used for accessibility, but also you can think of it whenever your phone is reading to you. Perhaps you're in the car, and I know that Alicia has shared this experience with me. When you're in the car, sometimes your phone will tell you whatever is going on in the screen. That's a screen reader. And so what a screen reader does is it tells you whatever is going on that you can't otherwise see. And if you have a student who has a visual impairment, they can't see the picture. If you've put a description of that picture into your text, then they can know what the picture is showing and they don't miss out on the content just because they can't see it. And so that comes in handy for visual impairments. It also comes in handy, and I'll turn it to Alicia so she can share what she shared with me a little earlier in the week.
So one of the reasons how I use it is I will tell Siri to do something and it will read off all the emojis. So if I say something, it will read those. So the screen reader will read the emojis that my daughters use in their text messages to me. So that's how I've used it in the past. And it's very important to have.
And so as you're creating alternative text for your pictures, it's important that you talk about what the picture is showing. So if you couldn't see the picture, what is the most important part of that picture that users need to know? You want to tell the content and the function. And it should be brief and relevant. A screen reader will read all of it. So if it's paragraphs long, that's going to be really overwhelming. Additionally, screen readers always start when they see a picture with the phrases picture of or image of, so you don't need to write that. You can just say dog or dog in the field or whatever you're going to say. You don't need those disclaimers of picture of, image of, map of. And if you have a picture that serves no purpose, so there's no reason to actually add alternative text to it, you can mark it as decorative so that somebody using it just knows that it's not important. They didn't need to see it. And whenever you have images, and this comes up a lot, especially in social media, a lot of people who will take a picture of like a bell schedule or a bus schedule, and screen readers don't read actual images. They read the descriptions within an image. So you want to avoid putting text within an image unless you are going to then use that same text in the alternative text. And I linked here to an alt text decision tree. This is to help you in your journey to know what you might want to say and whether you should add alternative text. And so I have an example here. But before we get to that, and I know one person did say they're using Microsoft. So if you're using Microsoft, you would right click into a picture and hit view alternative text. And that's where you would add alt text. And in Google, if you have a picture, you simply right click, same type of process, and you hit alt text. And then this box pops up. And in this case, and I picked this specifically, this one's really just a decorative image. There's no purpose to it other than to decorate my page. So I could put in decorative. And in Microsoft, there's actually a box where you can just check decorative. If instead I was using an actual picture, I could put in my alt text and say dog looking at his owner or dog in a field. So that's kind of the gist of adding alternative text in those two platforms.
Another one because I can't.
Did somebody have a question? And so in the chat, this is just some alternative text practice. This is number 1, this is number 2, and this is number 3. What do you think you would put as alternative text for number 1, number 2, and number 3? And you can also unmute. Alicia, what would you put for number 2?
For number 2, I would put electronic reading device with reading glasses.
Perfect. And I see that in the chat too. I see that number 2, most people said glasses and an iPad, glasses and a tablet. Number 1, people holding hands forming a circle, people on a green circle. Number 3, decorative. Absolutely. So number 3, unless there was a reason why you put it in there, that would be a decorative image. Number 2 would definitely be something related to glasses and an e-reader. And then I mentioned before function. And so if for some reason you were putting this on a page where the reason it's there is to tell you that it is going to be a reading assignment, then you could change that up and say something like icon for reading assignment. So it really depends on what you're using it for and what the actual content is. So green circle would work. This could be an icon symbolizing togetherness. So you know your content and the gist of what you're trying to explain. You use that to determine your alt text. All right, so let's move into text formatting. And in the chat, if you have a favorite font or a font that you generally go to, please feel free to put that in. I know that for a really long time when I was in the classroom, Comic Sans was all anyone was using, and then everybody got over it. So I'm just curious to know what you're all using now. Georgia? Haven't heard of that one. I use Calibri a lot. All right, so some things to think about in terms of your fonts. Font type, consistency, size, and readability play a huge role in accessibility. And it's interesting because other than the Andica font that Zerla shared, all of these fonts are generally sans serif font. And what this means is they don't have all the bells and the whistles. So serif is like the decorative little kind of circles that go at the end of letters. And when you are thinking about accessibility, you want it to be less decorative. So sans serif fonts like Arial, Calibri, those are generally more accessible and easier for people to read. Additionally, you want to be consistent with your font. So you don't want to have changing fonts throughout a document. It really doesn't do well for cueing the reader that they can continue on with reading and understanding and comprehending. It kind of is a shock to the system. You want to make sure that font size remains readable as users change their browser settings. And so when we go into trainings in future sessions, we'll talk about Chrome settings and how you can enlarge. We'll also talk about different Chrome apps and extensions where you can have magnification. And so just know that people might go in and magnify your content. You don't want it to get that blurriness as they enlarge or that really like small element as they shrink. And just for fun, a little interesting fact about dyslexia, Comic Sans is actually known to be one of the most useful fonts for dyslexia. Microsoft has created a font called Sitka also that is really useful for dyslexia. But for those of us who decided we never want to use Comic Sans again, it does have its purpose. And so here's an example of text formatting. And number one is a poor example because, and then even though it says the answer in here, if anyone can tell me what they think about why this text formatting for number one might not be the best. Inconsistency, absolutely. So we have 3 different fonts within one sentence. Other things to think about, the fonts, we've got these all caps fonts, which make it difficult to read. It is too small for sure. This part is definitely too small. So there are a lot of things going on with it. And actually, they're both a little blurry now that they're zoomed in. So that's not great either. But in general, that's something to think about as you are using text. So let's move into hyperlinks. And there are a lot of things that when we create hyperlinks for things, we generally will put something like click here, read more, link. How many of us do that? Maybe a thumbs up in the chat, just generic, click here, read more. Yeah, so that's very common. And so there are 2 things about hyperlinks for accessibility that are not the best. The first is leaving a link as it is. So as Alicia and I were mentioning before, when students are using a screen reader or when an individual is using something that's reading to them, that will read all of the characters within a link. So it will say https:// By the time it finishes the link, whomever is listening is going to feel very overwhelmed. In addition to that, they won't know where they're going. They're just going to know that they're going to a link somewhere. So that didn't help at all. In addition to that, those things like read more or link, those don't really help either because that doesn't tell me anything about what I'm going to be reading, what I'm going to be exploring. So as you create hyperlinks, it's really important to start to change the display text to tell the reader where they're going. So for example, if it's going to the San Diego County Office website, you would change the text to say San Diego County Office website. If it's going to a PDF or a document, you might want to let somebody know. And so you want to really focus, and I'll show it in Google how you would do this. When you have a link, this one's really long, you can click into a link and then hit this pencil icon. And this text area here, this should no longer contain the link, because that magnifying glass, that takes you to the link itself. So that's going to stay. But for the text, now we could say wherever it's going. So this could be, in this case, it's to my unlocking accessibility slides. And again, the screen reader will tell somebody that it's a link, so you don't need to say link to. It'll do that automatically. And so now the person listening will know that when they click on this, they'll have a link to my slides. So that's very important. And if you're doing it in Microsoft, it's very similar. You just right click into it, and then you can go to edit link and change the display text. See some in the chat. Got it. Interesting. So Zerla shared just that the font that she uses is easier on the eye for certain letters. So for our hyperlink practice, I'm going to click into here and into here. What would we write for the hyperlink that takes you to this? And you can say it out loud or put it in the chat.
Career pathways.
Yeah, so it's a career pathways banner. And what would the website, the logo's here, so. Yep, SDCOE website, SDCOE career pathways, perfect. And for this one, this is those guidelines I was telling you about. So what might we put for our link text here?
Put in the title, quick reference, how to meet WCAG.
Absolutely. Just put in the title of exactly what it is. And you can do that really easily. Just copy and paste it and then put it in that display text. Perfect. So the next consideration as you are designing your content is to think about headings. And so with a show of thumbs up or emojis in the chat, how many of you use the heading structures in your documents? Okay, got a few. That's really helpful. And so headings are really helpful as you're designing web pages too. They're incredibly useful, but headings are also useful, and sometimes people don't use them when they're using some content in Microsoft Word or in Google Docs. And so when you're thinking about headings, what they do is they communicate a structure for your users of what they're going to see. And so if you have a title, then especially if someone's using a screen reader, it will read that that's the title. And so it'll say title, and then it will read what the title is. It'll do the same thing if you have a heading. So it'll say heading, and then the level of the heading and what the heading is. And so that's really great for someone with a visual impairment who is listening. It's also really useful for students who maybe struggle with organization, or students who have a hard time just reading challenges in general, because it helps to really guide them through a document. And as you're creating headings, and I'll show you this within a platform, it's really important that you use the right ones for the right things. So for example, if this is the title of my document, I would use styles. So to create any type of header format within Google or Microsoft, you use the styles menu. And I would go to title because it's my title. Then if I have a main header, I would call it heading 1. These are going to be my big headings. If I have headings within headings, those would then become heading 2. In this case, this would be just a generic heading 2 or a heading 1 because it's a different topic. But so basically you're just breaking things down, and then all of the rest of your text is going to be normal text, which is set by default, so you don't need to put that. And so maybe if I'm talking about hyperlinks, then I could say Google hyperlinks and Microsoft hyperlinks. And now these would be my subheaders. So I'd make them heading 2. And so as I mentioned, this is super useful for screen readers. This is really useful for people who struggle with organization or reading, just to help guide them visually to the right section. The other thing that's awesome about using styles menus in Google or Microsoft is then you can go in and you can go to Insert and Table of Contents, and you can insert a table of contents. It breaks the document down by all of your headings, subheadings. Normal text won't be in there so they don't overwhelm the user. And then a user can click into it and it will take them directly to that subheading. And so this is a great way to make it easy to navigate through long documents for your students. The same thing applies in Microsoft. So you highlight, and then in the home pane, there's this styles menu. You select your specific one. And then if you want to insert a table of contents, you go to References and Table of Contents, and that's there for you. Any questions so far?
I just want to add that a lot of people probably already know this, but using the style or the text, it's easy to find the information on the doc, whether it's Google or Word.
Absolutely. Yeah. I use them no matter what whenever I create information, because if I have a 20-page document, I know exactly where I'm going and it'll take me right there. All right. The next one is captions, and you may have noticed today as I've been presenting, we enabled the Zoom captions. And one of the nice things that's happened, especially in the last few years, is that automatic captions are getting better and they're integrated into so many different platforms. And so as I'm presenting within this Zoom session, I have captions going as an option for people who want to see the captions. They can also get a transcript of everything that I've said throughout. Microsoft Teams does something similar. So as you're presenting any kind of recorded session, you have all these options to have auto captions. They're not perfect. And in terms of real accessibility, it should be error-free. So it's really important to go back when you're recording something and check your captions, but it's a step in the right direction to turn on your captions as you present something that you're recording. And so captions, as many of us are familiar with, provide a text-based alternative to what's spoken in a video, a recording, in audio. And it's imperative for people with auditory disabilities. The reason for this is because if they can't hear what you're saying, at least they can have a play-by-play synopsis via text of what is going on in the session. And so it is imperative for your students who have auditory disabilities. It's also really useful just for processing in general for students to have 2 or more means to process so they can listen and they can see the words. It's useful when you're watching videos in loud locations. Some of us do trainings from Starbucks or somewhere else, and we don't want to turn on our sound. So we can really use this in multiple ways. We can also use it to clarify unclear content. If somebody's unsure, sometimes some of us have accents, we talk quickly. What can we clarify through the verbal or the written of the verbal content? And so as I mentioned, those should be synchronized and error-free. So they should match up very well with the timing of the speech. And if you want to be extra supportive of your students, you can use audio descriptions and transcripts. And a lot of times when you caption something, you can also download it as a file that serves as a transcript too. And so that's really useful if you are recording. And then I want to show you that even if you're not recording yourself, so if you're in the classroom and you're presenting in Google Slides or you're presenting a PowerPoint, they have options for captioning, live captioning as well. And so in your slides, if you're in Google Slides, you would go to slideshow mode. And from here, when you hover over, there's this 3-dot button, more options, and you'll notice it says caption preferences. And from here, you can go up and toggle captions. Currently, they're only in English, but as you go, it will start to caption everything you're saying while you're saying it. And again, not perfect, but especially as you are live teaching, this can be a great way to support students who speak different languages, students who have auditory impairments, and students who just process better when they see things textually in addition to listening. The other thing that you can do if you're using Microsoft is you can use Microsoft slideshows, have the options to always use subtitles. And with Microsoft, they actually do also have options for the spoken language. So they have a lot more language options and the subtitle language. So if you're presenting and you're using Microsoft, you can put out that you're speaking in English and then you can do your subtitles in a different language. And so that's really useful as well. And if you happen to be recording and you forgot to use the captions within Teams or within Zoom, you can use YouTube. And this is my general YouTube page. So if you go into the videos that you are uploading, or once you upload a video, you can click into that video. And if you scroll down to show more, there's an option here under language and caption certification to select your video language. And so as soon as you set your video language, it will make it so that this little CC option appears within your YouTube video when you go to it. So I'll actually go to this one for a second. So now I have the CC option, and the CC will allow captions to play. Welcome to becoming an accessibility superhero. I'm talking. And so that's a really good option. Again, they're not perfect, but they're useful for just captioning on the fly. And that one has multiple different languages as well. Absolutely, I will be sharing the presentation with you. And just for a little bit of an extra bonus, if you're using YouTube videos and you're interested in adjusting the captions, you can go to the gear icon, which is your settings, and you can click into here. And then if you go to options, you have so many different options of how your captions display. So you can adjust the font color, the font family, things like that, where the captions display, and you can adjust the language, auto translate into other things. So YouTube has a lot of options for captioning too. All right, let's jump into the last consideration, which is contrast and color. And I put in here a contrast checker link, and I'll show this for you in a second so that you can see how to use it. But it's important when you're thinking about your content, sometimes, especially if we're in primary classrooms, we like to use page backgrounds for our worksheets and make them really pretty. Sometimes we play around with, like, maybe we'll have a light pink background and dark blue text. And that can be nice in terms of visuals, but sometimes that makes it really difficult to read. And so it's important when we think about what our content is that we don't forsake accessibility for making something visually appealing. And so we want to make sure that we're always kind of thinking about the contrast and whether things are readable for our users with visual impairments and also just for our users in general. And that's where this contrast checker comes in, which I'll show you right now, because it will tell you what the contrast level is for your document and whether it's acceptable. And so, for example, if we have a foreground color of blue and a background color of white with a normal size text, that would pass. However, if I have, and I'm just going to look up really quickly a hex code, which is like the color code for bright pink, to put it into here to show you. If I have this, and then I have this foreground color, my text is blue, looks pretty, but that's going to be difficult for people to read, not only if the text size is normal, but also if there's large text. And so this is important as you're thinking about it. It's always really pretty easy if you keep the standard colors of white with like a black or a dark blue background. You're probably going to be, sorry, white with black or a dark blue text, you're always going to probably be okay. But as you start mixing these colors throughout with your backgrounds and your pictures and your words, it's important to check it. Additionally, color shouldn't be the sole method for communicating information. And this is because if a student can't see, or perhaps a student is colorblind, they may not be able to tell, for example, that a button is red. So if you say, click on the red button, they may not know that that button is red. It may appear to them as a brownish green. And when possible, avoid using red and green color combinations, because a lot of people who have color blindness, there are so many different types of color blindness, but a lot of them are red-green, which then this example shows kind of turns out to look like this. So all of the red-green for certain individuals with color blindness might look something like this dark brownish green. And so here's an example. The green mushrooms listed here are okay to eat. The red mushrooms will kill you. Does anyone want to unmute, or you can put into the chat, which ones can you eat? And some of you may know just because you cook or you eat a lot of regular mushrooms, but if you didn't, what would you guess?
I would eat everything because it's all green.
Exactly. Looks like you can eat them all, and you can't eat them all. So this would be, if you aren't colorblind, you would know that you can't eat the red ones. You have two different types that would have killed you. And so this is something that just as you start thinking about what you're designing, those little changes can make a world of difference for people based on difficulties, challenges, impairments. Yeah, exactly. All right, so we've gone over a lot today, and I really didn't want to go into too much because we have so many sessions coming up. We have a session next week on AI and accessibility where we're really going to move into how you can use AI to support your students with different learning differences. We have another one that's going to look at apps, extensions, and device features. So in this one, we'll be talking about Chrome apps you can use to support your learners, as well as specific features you can use within different devices that are useful for accessibility. We'll move into accessibility best practices, which will include strategies, and we'll also talk about things like accessibility checkers and tools that you can use specifically to make accessible content. And then the last of this specific series will be about the future, and we'll walk through a little design thinking process to envision and design for accessibility. And then my colleague Pam and I will be doing an accessibility and inclusive technology crossover event as our final accessibility offering for the network this year. So we have that, and I see now Zerla shared in the chat, other than black, what are safe colors? So in general, if you have a lot of contrast between something, so white and black, so that could be a black background with white, or a light background with dark text, dark background with light text. So just trying to think of kind of opposites on the color scale. When it gets darker, you're going to want to go lighter with whatever the opposite is. And like I said, and I have it in the chat, or sorry, I have the slides in the chat, but I can also share this with you. It's a really easy way to check your content. So for example, if you have, let's go in here and I'm going to do my page color. We'll just pick this dark green. And now I have dark green, and maybe I'm going to put my text color as this blue. Now, if I didn't know what this blue is considered, it's a dark cornflower blue too. I can look that up, or I can click on add a custom color. And when I do that, it tells me what that hex code is. So I can check this now and see in my checker whether this text would go against, go back, so many open. This green was here, so this one was called this color. It's gonna fail. Now, did I need to actually check that? I personally could tell that that doesn't look very good. When I looked at it, it looks like the words don't stand out anymore. So you can use this, or you can just kind of eyeball it and assume that usually as you have these lighter, like, so we have darker colors, it's still failing. But if we make this significantly lighter, it's gonna start to pass. Any other questions? All right, well, I am going to stop the recording, and do remember we have many upcoming sessions, and if you think there's anyone who'd be interested in any of those topics, please share the form link with them too. I'll share this again with you in the chat, and if you do have any questions, we'll be on for a few more minutes. Thank you, everyone.